Hi there, and welcome to Attached Together, the podcast where we explore attachment theory and what it really means for counsellors, psychotherapists and psychologists in practice. Created by the team at Optima, providers of the Level 5 and Level 7 diplomas in attachment-based psychotherapy, this podcast is a space to deepen your understanding, reflect on your work and stay connected to the heart of attachment-informed practice. I'm Darren, a counsellor and attachment-based psychotherapist in private practice. Alongside hosting this podcast, I teach on the Level 5 courses at Optima. And a quick note before we begin, our episodes now come with a CPD certificate. If you'd like to access it, simply head to our website or check the show notes. Joining me today is Joanne Kay, a psychodynamic and attachment-based therapist who is a trainer and teaches the Level 5 attachment course at Optima. Jo, you have selected one of my favourite elements of attachment theory for us to look at today.
Good.
I'm really looking forward to this one. So you've chosen mentalization. It's a big topic. Where should we start?
It's a huge topic.
What do we actually mean by the term mentalization?
Okay. I'm probably kind of paraphrasing here, but I'll have a go at giving you Peter Fonagy's kind of succinct definition of mentalization. So Peter Fonagy's like the big name attached to mentalization. And he describes it as finding our minds in the minds of others. And holding the minds of others in our minds as well. So it's that strange word mentalization, you know, when I first learnt that word in my training, I was kind of, you know, thinking, well, what does that mean? What can I map, you know, what do I already know that I can kind of map that word onto? Is it empathy? Is it insight? You know, it's kind of connected to theory of mind as well. There's definitely a Venn diagram that overlaps. But then there's this, why do we need this extra word? Why won't these other terms quite do to describe what mentalization is? And when you learn more and more about mentalization, you realise, oh yeah, it is this other thing that kind of encompasses parts of all of those things like empathy, theory of mind, perspective maybe as well. So it's a lot of different aspects, but fundamentally it's an achievement of the attachment process. So
I like that. An achievement of the attachment process.
Yeah, it's something that is born from the early attachment relationships. So it's a process.
It is definitely a process. I have to say, the first time I heard the term mentalization, it took me to somewhere like Darren Brown. And I was thinking this was like, you know, some kind of magic thing that's hard to grasp. And actually, when I hear your definition, it's so central to what we're offering as therapists, isn't it? That's what's going on in the room all of the time. But having a grasp on what mentalization actually is, I have found has made my work with my clients so much richer because I can bring more knowledge to the room.
Yeah, it's and the way I see it, and the reason I'm a bit obsessed with mentalization, for me it kind of acts as a bridge between the sort of hard theory of attachment, you know, Bowlby's attachment theory, and kind of translates that in a way to what we're actually doing in the room with clients.
What would that look like if I saw you in the room?
Yeah, so supporting mentalization in the room is kind of holding a not knowing stance, which can be a little bit of a tension or a little bit of a conflict, because when we are working with theories like attachment theory that on paper can feel really deterministic, you know, it can feel like if X happens, that means Y happens. And for me as a psychodynamic therapist, you know, having that as my core training, that's really deterministic, you know. And mentalization reminds us that if we're holding a mentalizing stance ourselves, we're not assuming we know things about the client. There's no certainty when we're mentalizing. So there's something kind of paradoxical about it, because mentalization is about mirroring. It's about striving to understand one another and striving to understand what's happening in each other's minds on that two-way street. But it's also knowing that we don't know, it's also realizing that we can't truly know. We're just trying to find that connection and get it right enough, or get it right enough of the time, if that makes sense.
It does. And you say it's a two-way process.
Yeah. So in infancy and in childhood, mentalization, first of all, is something that's done by the caregiver. So the child kind of starts at 0 and can't do any mentalization. External stimuli are kind of just objects, really. And the caregiver, in an ideal scenario, marks the emotion that the child is feeling and then mirrors it. So there's research done into this in real micro moments of mirroring between mothers and babies by Beatrice Beebe. And those studies show that these really minute moments of marking what their best guess is at what the baby is feeling. So, for example, the baby cries and the mother or the caregiver might respond with a kind of open expression, maybe a soft tone of, oh, you're sad, or oh, something's wrong. So they're kind of mirroring that emotion. They're marking what's happening internally for that child. And then the child perceives that in their external environment, their emotions are reflected. So there's this kind of two-way street where the caregiver is kind of lending their mentalization ability to the child. And over time, the child begins to understand that they have a mind, that they have this sense of self when their internal feelings are mirrored in their external environment. So over time, the child becomes able to kind of internalize that. And I'm kind of, you can probably hear I'm getting into the territory of the internal working model. So it's overlapping with that as well. So it's this process of development that happens. And then depending whether or not that happened and whether that happened enough, the mentalization ability of then the older child and then the adult has this kind of baseline level. So there is something really interesting about mentalization, which I've found in some research that I'm doing at the moment. And mentalization can kind of be described in two different ways. So it's kind of operating on different levels as well. So there's this baseline level of mentalization, which I've just talked about, that kind of comes from the primary attachment. So depending on whether the mirroring happened, whether it was right enough of the time, there'll be either a higher or lower ability. So the measure of that is called reflective function, because it's kind of your ability to reflect on your own emotions and on the emotions and thoughts of others. It kind of comes into what we do in the room as well. I will come back to that. Excellent. But there's also this second way that mentalization kind of appears for us, and that there's this trait, there's this kind of state level of mentalization as well. So there's a baseline, but there's also a fluctuating up and down dynamic level of mentalization that happens as well. And that's the bit that's important to us as therapists in the room, because that can turn on a sixpence, that can change, and there have been studies into this, the level of mentalization can change within sessions. It can change month to month, day to day, week to week. Can be that quick? Yeah, minute to minute within a counselling session. Wow. Okay. Yeah, and that actually has been measured. So it kind of exists on these two planes. And I guess we could, the whole trait versus state thing kind of comes into attachment in general as well, because you could sort of say that about attachment style as well, or internal working models, that there's a sort of structural base part that is part of the personality, but then there's this fluctuating kind of surface level response to what's happening that might change under stress or in different relationships. So
but it's the response that's on that level rather than the inner reaction.
Yeah, exactly. So that baseline level can change slightly, very slowly, in long-term therapy, but it doesn't change much.
Right.
But what can change in a moment or in a session or across a shorter period of time that has real sort of therapeutic effects is that more surface level mentalizing. So what affects that in the moment is the regulation, the bodily regulation state that we're in that moment. And, you know, the golden rule that you will know, Darren, when we teach mentalization on the level 5 is you cannot mentalize if you are not regulated. You know, that's kind of how we frame it, because it's so intrinsically linked to bodily regulation, and mentalization starts to collapse as we get activated, as we get out of our window of tolerance. So for us as therapists, this kind of golden rule in this, you know, in all of this world of mentalization where there's all of these concepts and theories overlapping, the bit that's really important is regulation has to come first before we can reflect on why we're having those feelings or why someone else's behavior was as we experienced it. So we kind of have to focus on helping our clients to regulate and then get into that reflective discussion part of therapy.
And herein lies the risk of this discussion, because my mind has gone off to the neuroscience side of our teachings, where I'm thinking actually it's about the fight or flight response, the amygdala, the reptilian brain, and then what we describe as flipping the lid. That, you know, actually, if you're in fight or flight, you can't possibly put into action all these other elements. So we can look at it from that regard as well, as in you're not going to be able to mentalize unless the conditions are right, because actually if you're in a survival mode, you're just not going to be able to turn that on despite how much you wish to.
You know, it's a complicated process, you know, being in that mentalizing state or being in a state where mentalizing can happen. You know, there's a lot of demand on different bits of brain to be working together. You know, they have to be integrated, the different parts of the brain. So yeah, if we're activated in a fight or flight state, we just can't access that. And those can be some of the times when we have ruptures in therapy, when maybe there's a push to start reflecting or start mentalizing, or there's a demand placed on mentalizing ability before the client is actually regulated enough to do that.
And I've seen that in action in my own room, I have to say. We do have these ruptures, and you can kind of swoop in and think, well, this has worked before, so let's unpick it. And actually it's working at the client's pace always, isn't it? It's always working at their pace, which can feel quite destabilizing sometimes. As the therapist in the room, you feel like, well, this is my space and I know what I'm doing. But actually, it's about grounding yourself and reminding yourself, really, it's the client's process and we go at their rate.
Yeah. And there's a lot to be said for, in having that awareness of mentalization, we need to have the awareness of where we're at in ourselves and whether we're able to get there as well. And I often a sign of not mentalizing, or a sign that that's gone offline to an extent, is when we find ourselves as therapists holding a lot of certainty. Mentalization lives in knowing that we don't know for sure. So once we start slipping into feeling really certain, for example, about what's going on for the client, or really certain about what needs to happen next, we can maybe have a little alarm bell going off on there around, actually, I need to be holding openness and this stance of, actually, no, I'm maybe not sure, but I can offer my mind to you. I can maybe share what I'm hearing in this and be really, really tentative. And we are tentative anyway. We know to be tentative anyway as therapists.
Yeah.
But coming from a stance that's supporting mentalizing in ourselves and them, we need to really know that we don't actually know what's going on in their minds. And we also need to communicate that and really double down on that tentativeness and kind of offering something and saying, well, this might be wrong. Actually saying that, I might have got it wrong here, so feel free to throw this away. But that sounds like there's something around being really overwhelmed in that moment, or whatever it is we're offering. We're really saying this is to support you wondering and being curious about it. This isn't steamrollering my interpretation.
It's really interesting. Before we head to a break, I just wonder, is there a final takeaway that, if for those that are listening, is there one message that you'd like them to really hear from you regarding mentalization?
I suppose it would be, in terms of definition, that mentalization is moving into thinking about feelings rather than just feeling them.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that in a nutshell. We'll take a break and then we'll be back with our dilemma. If you've been carrying the emotional weight of your work lately, feeling stretched, tired, or a little disconnected, you're not alone. That's exactly why we created Restoring Your Secure Base, an attachment-informed therapist retreat designed to give you the space to pause, breathe, and reconnect with yourself, your work, and a community of therapists who truly understand. Across 2 days, you'll step away from the everyday into a calm, restorative environment at the Odney Club near Maidenhead in Berkshire. A beautiful setting that even inspired the world of The Wind in the Willows. We're also honoured that Linda Cundy will be joining us for a special talk and Q&A. The retreat includes workshops, shared reflection, experiential learning, 8 hours of CPD, and restorative experiences and a gong bath. Most importantly, it's a chance to reconnect with yourself and with a community that understands the work you do. To learn more and reserve your place, visit optimahealthservices.co.uk/therapist-retreat. Welcome back. Still here with Joanne, and we are looking at our dilemma. And so, Joanne, what are we making of this? A therapist feels like their client is resistant to the therapy.
Okay. And that's a familiar feeling for me. Is my knee-jerk response. We've all been there, haven't we?
Absolutely.
But yeah, it does link to what I was talking about with regards to, having certainty as therapists, because there's something around having that stance of, this client's so avoidant, or this client's just not engaging. If we're slipping into that, and we do slip into that, it does happen. We're in that place of certainty. And from a mentalizing perspective, there's a place where being able to sit with just wondering ability gets collapsed once you're holding something as the truth. And that's where supervision comes in. You need a really good supervisor who's going to sit and wonder with you, rather than them thinking, oh yeah, this client's really avoidant as well. Otherwise you get into a parallel process of everyone being sure what's going on as well. And the client might be thinking with certainty as well, the therapist doesn't like me, or the therapist thinks I'm hard work. So it's kind of, how do we move out of that place where wondering and curiosity collapses back into that place where we can be okay with being unsure again.
It seems surprising to me that the dilemma is really about the client being resistant to therapy, but yet our focus and our solution on that is actually from within the therapist rather than looking at trying to fix or change the client.
Yeah, and it can be, and again, you know, it's tempting to do that and think, okay, why are they being resistant? What can I do about that? You know,
Yeah,
like you said, how can I fix or change that? But actually, the only data we have is how we're feeling. You know, that's all we've got to go on. When we get those moments where we feel like the client is resistant, it can trigger things in us around imposter syndrome, or that we're not doing a good enough job. You know, I'd heard Georgina talking about this when she was talking about avoidant attachment on the podcast. So it kind of ties into that response of there's something wrong with how I'm performing as a therapist, maybe, and then we're spiraling that down that road into not good enough, etc.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, how do we bring us both back online? And again, maybe it's about getting regulated together and then going there and being curious, bringing that back in. You know, I'm wondering, I've got this sense that there's some tension here, or tell me how you're feeling, what's going on, you know, bringing it back to what's happening between us in this room right now.
Yes. Yeah. What's playing out? What's going on?
Yeah.
And every message you receive is a clue, isn't it? It's a clue to be looked at, and it's really for the therapist to maybe address it in the room, or maybe just take it away, reflect on it, because actually supervision is key for this answer, in my mind, to unpick.
Yeah, and again, it's another place where mentalization lives. You know, that's what our supervisors want to do, and that's what I want to do. Now I'm a supervisor. I'm trying to create an environment where, okay, let's get our heads together and wonder about this. Trying to create that environment of, we don't know, but we're going to try. we're going to try.
Yes.
Based on the facts we do have, which is what I'm feeling right now. And let's try and strive. There's a lot of striving in mentalization, I think. And I kind of like.
And actually, dare I say, I think a bit of bravery as well. A bit of bravery to really look inward, and a bit of bravery to then voice that externally. You know, actually, I've got a real sense that I'm feeling whatever that is, and bringing that into the space. Be that in unpicking it in supervision, or even in the room with the client. You know, as you said that, I had a real sense of this, and I'm just wondering what that means to you. And I think that general sense of wondering is important, but before we can even get to wondering, we've got to be honest with ourselves and have the courage to go to those places.
Yes, absolutely. And that you've kind of wrapped it up beautifully back to Bowlby, haven't you, there? Because
thank you.
It's back to that being able to explore.
Hey, Joanne, it's been so much fun having you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
I've loved
good
and wondering with you.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been really good fun. And if you think this sounds like fun and you want to know more about our level 5 or level 7 diplomas in attachment-based psychotherapy, you can find full details at optimahealthservices.co.uk. We'll see you next time. And now you can claim your free CPD certificate. You can either go to our website or look at the show notes and you'll find the link.